So what I wanted to do with this video is the vampire trend. Vampires is really hot right now. Unfortunately, it's not really the vampires that I grew up with, or any. It's really not even vampires that are the selling point of these films. It's much more of a romantic drama love interest stories the Twilight films are. So I guess the addition of the supernatural can make people feel more comfortable with exploiting teenage sexuality. If you can say, well, it could never really happen. This is a fantasy world. That's really what you're doing. I mean, it's really just a pre-teen sexual fantasy type of film. You're coming into puberty, and you know the hot guy is the dude that can kill everybody else and will ultimately always protect you and has an undying love for you, and that never happens ever, and not in high school, and not in reality. Well, that I mean, I'm not talking about the vampire thing. I mean, we all know that wouldn't happen. The first part, the undying love and devotion and protection part, and looking after you in front of himself, never happens. So, it is much more of a fantasy than the rest of these vampire films that I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about vampire flicks through the ages, and you'll probably notice some really key, noticeable exceptions to the flicks that I'm picking, and I'll tell you why. First off, the original Dracula with Bela Lugosi, the Universal film. I love that film. I just don't have it because the edition of it that I would want to get, the kind of book edition that Universal puts out, the Legacy edition, I think, is too expensive for me to get. And so I don't own that movie because that would be the edition that I would get. So that one's not. I don't have like a. I'll talk a little bit about it, but I don't have the actual film to show you or anything. The other one would be any of the Hammer films with Christopher Lee. The reason for that is I don't like Hammer films. I really don't. I really tried because some people, swear by them, but it's not my generation, nor is it my, even just not my generation. It's just not my kind of movie, really. So I'm going to be completely not concentrating on any of those movies because I haven't seen them and I don't have any of them. And really, let's be honest, hasn't Dracula and the Christopher Lee Dracula films, haven't they been discussed at enough? Like ad nauseum, those movies have been gone over and over. So let's just move on to something else. So the first film, and I'm going to go in, I guess, chronological order of the ones that I have, and these are just movies from my collection. This is by no means a complete history of the subgenre, so if you want to add movies in there, you can, because I'm sure there's a lot that I don't have. There's a couple I can think of right now in my head that I probably should have included that I have, but the first one, we have to begin at the beginning, and this is the beginning. This is Nosferatu, and this version that I have is a horrible version, and I wish to God that I didn't have it, but it is digitally remastered, so the picture quality is really good. Unfortunately, it's got music by Typo Negative. For whatever reason they read. I guess it's public domain now, and they redid the music in the film. I also have another version of the film that is just a regular version of the film. It's on one of those crappy 20-pack movies or something like that. It's so old and so inspirational that it's kind of hard for me to judge it because I wasn't born anywhere near the era where you can appreciate it. But you can appreciate the filmmaking and the sense that the director used a lot of shadowing, and he used a lot of shots that you would never been seen up to that point. Another thing about the film is, from what I understand, the lead actor in the film, the guy that plays Nosferatu, and his name escapes me right now, was a nut, basically, and he completely stayed in character. I think he even stayed in character when he wasn't working on the film. He stayed in the outfit and stuff. And there's a lot of stories about that guy and then the making of that film. So it's a German film, if I remember correctly, and I think that it was really the first film where people could see that could be a marketable thing, these creature kind of movies, and that led on to other things. It led, actually, directly would lead into like the Dracula, the Bela Lugosi Dracula, which is, I mean, this Dracula, Nosferatu, is almost like a rat-like creature, he almost like a rat bat kind of mixture, and is not in the least bit seductive or attractive, very frightening creation. Bela Lugosi in Dracula, 1931, was the beginning of all the I want to suck your blood, and look how, erotic I am, and, I will lure you in with my eyes, and this will be it, and this and that. And that was the beginning of that kind of the sensual vampire films. And, as you even look at the movies that I've got here, that trend would go in and out of favor with audiences throughout the decades. I mean, you would have the erotic vampire even in the 80s, and then like it would switch over to the outlaw vampire, and they would try to make them more realistic, and it just kind of shifted with the times. But Bela Lugosi as Dracula probably set the template for all the films that would come. So we'll move on from that. So then in the 60s you had a resurgence of Hammer films that didn't take the monster as in the atomic monster era from the 50s. These were more like they went back and did the Frankensteins and the Draculas and stuff like that with Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee mostly. So you had that whole renaissance, and that was like way amped up the sexuality and the kind of demure nature of the aristocratic vampire and kind of stuff. And that continued on, and then a really weird thing started. I guess it was a product of the time, but during the 70s that kind of fell out of favor, because actually all films like that kind of fell out of favor, because the 70s was kind of like a renewal of greedy, realistic filmmaking, and like a independent filmmaking came in, and it was before Spielberg and before the era of the big budget blockbuster, and so you had an attempt to make in almost all subgenres these realistic films. And I think that's where this one comes in, is you got 1977, and you never really know if this film is a vampire film or not. I'm going to take the assumption that it is. That's what it plays out to be. But you got 1977's Martin, and this is George Romero, the guy that, of course, directed Night of the Living Dead and Day of the Dead and Dawn of the Dead and all that. It's the story of a kid, John Amplas, who he thinks he's a vampire, and certainly other people in the film think he's a vampire, but you're never really sure if he is or not. He's a very disturbed kid, and he doesn't have any of the traits of vampires. Like, he doesn't have the teeth or the ability to suck blood. He uses like a razor blade to extract blood, and needles and stuff like that. So he doesn't really like have any of the supernatural characteristics of a vampire, but he certainly appears to like need to suck blood, and it's like a character study of John Amplas as he, is just a disturbed individual. You're never really sure if he's really a vampire or if he's just so disturbed that he thinks that, and it never really resolved itself even at the end of the movie. But it's an okay film. A lot of people give it a lot more credit than I think it deserves, but it's a very slow-paced film, and it's much more in the vein of something like I don't want to say Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. It's not that shocking, but it's got that kind of quality to it where it's kind of gritty filmmaking, and it's the loner character who can't get along with anybody in his family, and he's misunderstood. And it certainly is a unique take on the vampire mythology, I'll say that. So the next film that I have that immediately comes to mind that actually transitions us into a new decade. And keep in mind, you had other films in the 60s and 70s that were weird fucking films that were included vampires, like The Fearless Vampire Killers, which is like a Polanski, I think, directed, which was a comedy vampire film. It seems to me like, and as we go on with these films, you'll notice that whatever was popular, whatever type of film was popular around that time, vampires were the handy-dandy way to kind of insert that type of filmmaking into a character. Just, I don't know why vampires, but whatever was kind of in vogue then, it got thrown into a vampire film. Therefore, you got like laugh-in style comedies in the 60s. You've got film, independent film, kind of gritty filmmaking from the 70s, and then you move into the 80s, and this one is like a complete throwback back into the Bela Lugosi era. And this is Fright Night, which is like Dracula, the original Dracula, amped up on steroids with a lot better makeup effects for the 80s. Because Chris Sarandon's Dracula, Jerry Dandridge, is that kind of seductive, erotic vampire who lures women in and then gets them and takes advantage of them, and that kind of thing. It's the story of, it's kind of like like Dracula for the MTV generation, even though there was another film that said it comes even closer to that, but this one is an up-to-date version of that. You've got a kid moves in next door. A guy moves in next door to a kid who, the guy turns out to be a vampire, and the kid Charlie Brewster finds this out really, really quickly and tries to tell everybody about it. And of course, nobody believes him. They all think he's nuts. And then Chris Sarandon, who plays Jerry Dennis, finds out that he knows, and so he kind of starts going through his friends and his girlfriend and mom and tries to get to him. And eventually, in one of the best character roles I've ever seen, character actor roles, Roddy McDowall comes in as Peter Vincent, the vampire killer, who's the host of this cheesy midnight horror show, and he tries to hire him because he expects that he knows all the ways to get rid of a vampire. So he tries to hire him to take care of the vampire that's moved in next door. But of course, the guy thinks he's full of shit, and he's just trying to take him for his money until he finds out that it's the real deal. And it really, like, the film works because it's really timeless. It has a great cast, it has a great director, and it has great dialogue. But it also is a timeless movie in the fact that it's about faith and courage and a lot of really down and deep emotions that are in this film. Plus, it's scary as shit. So, that was kind of the renaissance of the Bela Lugosi Dracula film. So when we pick up, I'm going to go ahead and end this video because I've been going on for 15 minutes, and pick up with the vampire film that really kind of, it was definitely the MTV Pepsi generation kind of rock and roll vampire film. We'll pick up from 1987.